Have you ever built a life so carefully only to realize someone else was playing a different game altogether? I was sitting alone in my Santa Monica home that Tuesday evening, the sky bruised with the colors of an early California sunset. My guitar was leaning against the wall untouched for weeks. I hadn't written a song in nearly a year. At 52, the stage lights had faded, the applause long behind me. But the royalties from a dozen gold records still kept the fridge full and the lights on. I wasn't a star anymore, but I was steady, predictable, safe. Then the phone rang. Her voice was calm, too calm. She said she was calling from Phoenix, a recording session, she claimed, but I recognized the rehearsed tone. I'd heard it in the studio 100 times, right before a difficult take. "Johnny, I'm not coming back. My wife of 18 years. The woman who used to dance barefoot in my dressing room, the same woman who now confessed she'd fallen for someone else, my longtime producer." She ended the call with one final note. She'd already emptied our shared royalties account. What she didn't know was that the real music hadn't even started yet. When you've stood beneath stage lights long enough, you learn to recognize the silence that follows applause. Not just the one in the arena, but the kind that creeps into your life when the crowd goes home and the fame begins to fade. That silence had become a constant companion for me. After decades of touring, hit singles, and interviews in smoky radio booths, I thought I had finally made peace with the quieter version of myself. Johnny Westfield, the man who once shared top billing with legends, was now more myth than man, to most. And truth be told, I didn't mind. By 1979, I was spending more time in my garden than in the studio. My name still appeared on country radio rotations now and then. My old albums pressed into the hands of nostalgic fans or flipped through in vinyl shops across the Midwest. I had investments, a modest estate in Santa Monica, and a small team managing what was left of the Westfield brand. But my true wealth, what I cherished above all, was the life I'd built with Annabelle. We met backstage at the Grand Ole Opry in '61. She was a backup singer with a voice like worn velvet, and I was the new kid too stubborn to play by Nashville's rules. She laughed at my jokes, even the ones that fell flat, and we spent that first night in a booth at a Waffle House scribbling lyrics on napkins. 2 years later, we married under the stars at her uncle's ranch in Arizona. I gave her a life of movement. Tour buses, backstage chaos, and hotel check-ins under fake names. In return, she gave me grounding. She handled the details. My wardrobe, our finances, the press. I always told her she had the mind of a manager and the heart of a poet. By the time I turned 45, Annabelle was no longer the girl scribbling lyrics in diners. She had evolved, sharpened. She took on a more active role in our business affairs. She pushed for bigger deals with publishing companies, insisted on keeping tight control over royalties, and sat in on meetings with lawyers and record label executives. I saw it as love, as partnership, a woman protecting what we had built. But in hindsight, I was asleep at the wheel. In public, we still looked the part. Red carpets, charity auctions, an occasional appearance on local television. But the music at home had grown fainter. Conversations drifted from meaningful to mechanical. She started staying longer in Phoenix after so-called recording trips, claimed the heat helped her think. When I questioned it, she dismissed me gently, accusing me of paranoia, of being too nostalgic. I didn't push. I'd always believed in giving space. I thought love meant trust. It wasn't just the marriage that changed. The industry, too, was shifting beneath my feet. Disco and pop were taking over, and the market for slow, heartfelt country ballads was drying up. Producers wanted hooks and synths. Audiences wanted new faces. I stopped getting invited to award shows. Younger artists covered my songs but rarely mentioned my name. Even my old producer, Alan Royce, started showing more interest in flash-in-the-pan talent with slick hair and shallow lyrics. But none of that hurt like Annabelle's growing absence. She stopped coming to my shows. Said it felt repetitive. She'd once helped me choose every suit I wore on stage. Now she barely noticed when I left the house in jeans and a t-shirt. I told myself it was a phase, that maybe we were just getting older, and that love evolves like everything else. I didn't want to believe what my gut had been whispering. There's a strange kind of blindness that comes with memory. When you've shared history with someone, you fill in their present with echoes from the past. You explain away red flags by remembering the roses they once gave you, and I had 1,000 roses worth of memories with her. So, when she finally made that call from Phoenix, when she said she was leaving me for my own producer and had taken our money, I didn't cry, and I didn't yell. I just stood in the silence she left behind and listened closely. Because I knew one thing for certain. The spotlight may have dimmed, but I was still the man who built an empire out of verses and vengeance, and she'd just written the first line of the last song I would ever sing about us. I didn't need to be a detective to realize something was wrong. I may have left the stage, but I never stopped reading the room. And the room, the life Annabelle and I had shared for nearly 2 decades, had grown colder, emptier, and strangely theatrical. At first the shifts were small, missed dinners, vague explanations about business calls that couldn't be interrupted, a new lock code on her suitcase. She claimed it was because of airline theft. I wanted to believe her. But then came the bourbon. Annabelle never liked the stuff. Said it tasted like regret. But somewhere around last spring, a bottle of Blanton's began appearing in the cabinet above our record player. A gift from Alan, she said. I found the cork beside a lipstick-stained glass, one night after she'd gone to bed early. That same night I caught the reflection of her phone screen in the mirror, her fingers flying across the keyboard, smile too soft to be casual. I could feel the threads unraveling, but I didn't pull. Not yet. Instead, I did what any old-school country boy would do. I turned to routine. Morning jogs along the coastline, late nights in the music room, strumming unfinished chords. I even tried recording again. I thought if I just gave her time, space, the freedom to breathe, maybe we'd find each other again. But freedom without connection is just distance. Then Alan Royce started showing up more often. He was slick in that plastic Hollywood way. Always. Had been. Shiny shoes, breath that smelled like imported gin, and compliments so smooth they slid off your back before you could grab hold of them. He was good at pretending, and I had trusted him for years. He'd produced my first breakout album. But lately he was hanging around too much for a man with a full roster of younger stars. Dropping by with flowers, excuses, and unreleased demos, he insisted Annabelle had a vision for the biggest red flag. He stopped calling me Johnny, started calling me old friend. Then there were the trips. Annabelle said she was working on a memoir, said she needed to interview people who had known us in the early days, former bandmates, label executives, old roadies. I wanted to believe it. After all, she'd been the keeper of our story for so long. But when I called one of those old friends, in Austin, the very one she was supposedly meeting, he told me he hadn't seen her in over a year. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because that's not how I was raised. You don't accuse someone you love without proof. And besides, I wanted to know just how deep it all went. So I began watching more closely. I logged into our joint accounts, something I rarely did before. I noticed subtle withdrawals. Not huge, but irregular. Annabelle handled the finances, always had. But now, some of our royalty statements weren't adding up. A licensing deal in Europe that I had never signed off on. A $14,000 check written to a company I didn't recognize. I called our business manager in Nashville, Mitch, a man who had stuck with me even when the spotlight had faded. I asked him to dig around quietly. A few days later, he called me back, his voice hesitant. Johnny, some of your copyrights aren't in your name anymore. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just betrayal of the heart. It was betrayal of legacy, of identity. The songs I'd bled into over smoky hotel balconies and tour bus bunks, she was siphoning pieces of them, rerouting ownership under shell names. Mitch found 3 of them, all tied back to a limited partnership she co-owned with Royce. They were preparing to cash in on the catalog. My catalog. I sat on the porch that night, a bourbon in hand, not Blanton's, but something cheaper, rougher, and I didn't cry, I didn't scream. I just listened to the waves and thought about timing. In music, there's a beat before the chorus, what we call the drop. It's the breath before everything explodes. That's where I was. I wasn't heartbroken. I was tuning up. Because if they thought the man who once sold out Madison Square Garden twice in 1 week was going to walk away quietly, they'd forgotten what made me famous in the first place. I knew how to deliver a performance they'd never forget. By the time the final pieces of the puzzle slid into place, I no longer felt anger. What I felt was precision. Cold, focused, necessary. I'd spent years learning how to build a song, how to layer emotion under melody, how to delay the hook until just the right moment. Planning a response to Annabelle and Royce wasn't so different. It just required a quieter instrument. I began with the foundation, my music. The first thing I did was call Mitch back and tell him to prepare a new trust. Not just a financial one, but a creative one. We transferred every remaining title I still owned, the original publishing rights, the royalty streams from relicensing, the audio masters from my last 3 studio albums, into an irrevocable trust under the name JW Heritage Fund. The paperwork was dense, but Mitch had the right team. It was done in a week. The trust required dual signatory approval for any future disbursements over $5,000, mine and a legal executor's. Without both, nothing moved. The brilliance of it was simple. Annabelle didn't even know it existed. She still thought the primary royalty account, our old shared one in Santa Monica, held the key to the kingdom, and that was fine by me. Let her think she was bleeding me dry, when in truth, all she was draining was the shell I'd left behind. Next, I turned my attention to the publishing contracts. A young entertainment lawyer I'd worked with during a brief Vegas residency, Sierra Alvarez, owed me a favor. She was sharp, barely 30, and had more legal grit than most men twice her age. I told her what I needed. Identify any current licensing deals that could be legally frozen due to potential fraud or misrepresentation. She reviewed 3 contracts Annabelle had co-managed over the past year and found grounds to freeze royalty payments on all of them pending legal clarification. They'll push back, Sierra warned me, sipping her espresso during our meeting in a West Hollywood cafe. But if she tries to escalate, we have audit rights. That gives us leverage. You're not stopping the show. You're just changing the script. That same week, I had my assistant remove access to all shared business email accounts. Passwords changed, cloud drives encrypted, mail forwarded to a P.O. box only I had the key to. The estate's gate code, new. The security cameras, upgraded, and set to notify me directly when accessed. I wasn't being paranoid, I was being prepared, and through it all I said nothing to Annabelle, not a word. I still answered her occasional texts with short replies, kept my tone warm, even light. She sent me photos from Arizona, claiming she was researching a local music archive for her memoir. I told her I was proud of her, that I couldn't wait to read it. She sent a heart emoji. I stared at it for a long time, then turned off my phone. The deception ran deep, but deeper than that was the realization that I had enabled it. I'd let comfort turn into complacency. I'd mistaken shared history for loyalty. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that while I had been clinging to the idea of us, she had already written me out of the story. But here's the thing, about old country boys. We don't forget the songs that made us, and we sure as hell don't let someone else sing our final verse. I kept a journal during that time. Not for therapy, I've never been the type, but for clarity. Each night I wrote down one truth I'd learned that day. Small observations. The power of silence. The cost of trust. The way love can be repurposed into leverage when someone stops believing in you. One entry still stands out. Sometimes, justice isn't a thunderclap. It's the quiet tightening of a noose made of paper and patience. By the time I finished setting every safeguard in place, I wasn't just protected, I was insulated. Annabelle didn't know it, but the walls she thought she'd slipped through were now closing in around her. Quietly, legally, completely. And soon she'd reach for what she thought was rightfully hers and find nothing but air. The show wasn't over. It was just intermission. The trigger wasn't a bang, it was a message. It arrived on a Sunday afternoon while I was sitting on my back porch watching the shadows shift over the hills. The light was gold, the kind you only get in California in late October. My phone buzzed. A text from Annabelle. "We need to talk." I made a decision. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I already knew the decision she was referring to. The quiet crescendo we'd both been pretending not to hear had finally built to its peak. I took one last sip of coffee and went inside. An hour later, she called. Her voice was smooth, like it had been rehearsed. Polished and distant, the way she used to sound on press calls when she was speaking on my behalf. But now the words weren't wrapped in warmth. They were laced with cold resolve. "I'm staying in Phoenix," she said. "Alan and I are moving forward with the catalog rebranding. It's time we both focused on what we really want." There, it was. The word she hadn't used until now. We. As in, her and Royce. She was done hiding. She thought she had already won. "I've also initiated a transfer from the Santa Monica royalty account," she added almost offhandedly. "Just tying up some things. My attorney said it's within my rights." I let the silence hang. Not out of shock, out of calculation. Then I said, "I see." That was all. No anger, no pleading. Just 3 syllables and a breath. She hesitated for a moment, maybe expecting more, but I gave her nothing. After a short, awkward pause, she ended the call. No goodbye. I walked straight to my office and opened my laptop. As expected, the transfer request was sitting in the system. $18,000, an exact clean-out of the old account. The one she believed was still tied to the bulk of our assets. The one that, unbeknownst to her, now functioned like a stage prop, hollow and decorative. The request was marked pending. She hadn't read the new authorization protocol, of course. I had set it up to require dual authentication, mine and a secondary trustee's, for any withdrawals over $10,000. I could almost see her frustration in my mind's eye, picturing her staring at the denied transaction email, confusion spreading into panic. That evening she didn't call again, but someone else did, her sister. Danielle and I had never been close. She lived in San Diego, spent most of her time on yoga retreats, and hosted a podcast about energy healing. But now she was suddenly concerned about Annabelle's emotional stability and asked if I could be kind during this transition. I politely declined the suggestion. 2 days later, Royce himself tried to reach out, a voicemail smooth and patronizing, laced with false brotherhood. "Johnny, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. We can work this out like gentlemen." I played it once, then deleted it. Instead, I called Sierra, my lawyer. We met that afternoon in her downtown office. I handed her the screenshots of the transfer attempt, the voicemail recording, and the catalog paperwork that Royce had recently filed, attempting to secure rights to one of my early albums under a fraudulent shell company. "Are you ready?" she asked. "I've been ready since the moment she poured that bourbon," I replied. Sierra began drafting the emergency injunction that would halt all royalty transfers from any account associated with my name until the fraud claims were formally investigated. Within 24 hours, the Santa Monica account was frozen. The banks were notified. Notices were served. And just like that, Annabelle's carefully choreographed exit began to unravel. The next morning, the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised. I opened it to find Danielle standing there, her face a mix of concern and something colder, calculation. She said Annabelle had asked her to collect a few personal items. Winter coats, jewelry, some photo albums. I let her in. But when she mentioned needing to confirm if the transfer had gone through, I understood her real purpose. I walked her to the kitchen, opened my laptop, and turned the screen toward her. "Pending," I said. "Authorization declined." Danielle blinked. "She'll be upset." I nodded. "That's her choice." She left shortly after, carrying a suitcase filled with designer coats, but no closure. And still I heard nothing from Annabelle, which was fine, because soon I'd be speaking louder than she ever imagined, and I wouldn't be using words. I'd be using proof. The fallout from the denied transfer rippled faster than I anticipated. It didn't take long for Royce's charm to give way to aggression. The man who used to toast champagne in backstage lounges and tell me I was the last real poet of the genre was now leaving clipped voicemails through clenched teeth, threats wrapped in polite phrases. He reminded me that contracts could be challenged, that joint assets weren't so easily split, that bad press could follow a man like me, even this late in the game. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I reached out to someone who'd fallen off my radar, Hank Wilcox. Hank was a steel guitarist I'd toured with back in '67. We hadn't spoken in years. He'd left the industry after a bad record deal and opened a repair shop in Sedona. But word travels fast in this business, especially when money's involved. When I called him, he answered on the first ring. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you," he said. "You got time for the truth or just the polite version?" "Truth," I said. He didn't hold back. Turns out Royce had been bragging for months. Quietly, slipping comments to session musicians, industry scouts, even retired label heads, talking about how he'd found a way to revitalize the Westfield catalog, and how the old man wouldn't even see it coming. Hank said the rumor was that Royce planned to remaster my classics, re-release them under a new label and spin them as a lost Americana collection, curated by Annabelle. "He's been lining up distributors," Hank added. "Big ones, overseas markets too." And just like that, I saw the bigger picture. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about legacy theft. They weren't trying to erase me. They were trying to replace me. I hung up the phone with Hank and sat in my den staring at the old framed photo on the wall. Me, Annabelle, Royce, taken after my second album went gold. We were smiling. I remembered that night. The bottle of Jack we shared. The laughter. And yet, as I stared at Royce's expression in the photo, I realized something I hadn't seen before. He wasn't celebrating, he was calculating. Royce had never wanted the spotlight for himself. He wanted control of the light. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the original vinyl pressing of Dust Roads and Bloodlines, my first full-length LP. It had been the project that launched everything. 12 songs written in the back of a tour bus and recorded in a single week on analog tape. It was raw, flawed, honest, and most importantly, still mine. But I had a suspicion Royce didn't think I had the paperwork to prove that anymore. So I drove down to the storage facility in Echo Park where I kept all the originals, legal documents, lyric notebooks, old publishing agreements, boxes and boxes of it, most of it untouched for years. I spent that evening digging through yellowed folders until I found what I needed. The 1971 publishing contract for Dust Roads and Bloodlines, signed in blue ink by a younger, cockier version of myself. And more importantly, it was never amended, never sold, never restructured. Royce had built a house of cards on a faulty foundation. I scanned the contract and sent it to Sierra. "Send this to every distributor you think he's talked to," I told her, preemptively. Within 48 hours, 3 international licensing firms quietly pulled out of negotiations with Royce's shell label. One even forwarded us an internal email chain where Royce had assured them that I no longer managed the publishing of my own work. Sierra chuckled when she read it. "This is attempted fraud, Johnny. It's not just unethical, it's criminal." Still, I didn't want to go nuclear. Not yet. I knew Royce's ego wouldn't let this go quietly, and that meant he'd get sloppy. I just needed to keep tightening the rope, a little more each day. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't in what you say, it's in what you refuse to let them steal. And they were about to find out that when you try to erase a man's voice, he doesn't disappear. He amplifies. It came, as most revelations do, wrapped in something ordinary, a knock on the door just after dusk. I wasn't expecting anyone that night. The house was quiet. The kind of stillness that only happens when you've stripped away everything. Untrue. I opened the door to find a young woman standing on the porch, no older than 25 maybe. Shoulder-length hair, worn denim jacket, a familiar nervous energy in her eyes. "You don't know me," she said softly, "but I think I can help you." Her name was Lacey. She'd been one of the backup singers on a short tour Annabelle and Royce put together the year before. a small string of theater performances across Arizona and New Mexico. It was billed as a tribute to timeless country traditions, but in reality it had been Royce's attempt to test market Annabelle's solo revival. It didn't go well. The crowds were thin, the energy off. But something else had happened. On that tour, something Lacey had quietly kept with her until now. She pulled a small brown envelope from her purse and handed it to me. "I recorded something," she said. "Not on purpose, just, I like to keep tape running when I'm warming. Up backstage, it's how I memorize harmonies. This was left on." I opened the envelope. Inside was an old cassette tape. Analog. Labeled in black marker. Green Room. Albuquerque. She nodded toward it. "It's them. Annabelle and Royce. Talking. About you. About the catalog. About plans." I invited her in, offered her tea, but she declined. Said she just wanted to do the right thing and be gone. Before leaving, she added, almost as an afterthought, "He promised her a Grammy campaign, told her she was wasting her life being your shadow. Said once you were out of the way, she'd finally get what she deserved." Then she left. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the tape. I didn't have a cassette player anymore, but I knew someone who did. Mitch. I called him the next morning, and within the hour, we were in his office, listening as Royce's voice crackled through the tinny speakers, unmistakable and smug. "You don't have to worry about him," he said. "Johnny's too sentimental. He'll never see it coming. We just need to move fast. Once the new branding rolls out, it's done." Then Annabelle, colder than I'd ever heard her. "He still thinks I'm writing a memoir." Pathetic. There was more. Conversations about transferring catalog access to a new management company Royce controlled. Discussions of rewriting parts of my personal history for PR purposes, airbrushing me out of the very songs I'd written. At one point, Royce even joked about changing the co-writing credits on several tracks to give them a more modern feel. I felt the weight of every word like gravel in my gut. But it wasn't just betrayal. It was theft. Identity theft. Legacy theft. Emotional treason disguised as strategy. Mitch paused the tape. "We need to take this to Sierra." I agreed. Back at Sierra's office, we digitized the audio and attached it to a legal complaint draft we'd already begun preparing. But Sierra had another idea. "What if we don't go straight to court?" she asked. "What if we let them come to us thinking they still have the upper hand?" I didn't answer right away, because truthfully, I wanted to fight. I wanted to drag Royce's name through the mud. I wanted to expose Annabelle for what she'd done. Not just to me, but to the history we'd built together. But revenge, real revenge, doesn't always look like a courtroom. It looks like leverage, and leverage, when used correctly, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to exist. So we waited. 2 more weeks. I didn't respond to Annabelle's emails or Royce's lawyer's threats. I kept the pressure steady and the silence louder than any denial. Then it happened. An invitation arrived, formally drafted, requesting a private mediation. Their tone had changed. Suddenly, Royce's legal team wanted to resolve any misunderstandings, amicably. Annabelle included a handwritten note asking if we could close this chapter respectfully. Respect? They'd tried to erase my name, rewrite my voice, rob the very music that had paid for every home, every dinner, every step of the life we once lived together. But I had the master tapes, and now I had the recordings. And I wasn't just going to walk into that mediation, I was going to conduct it. The mediation took place in a private downtown office near Century City. Slick glass walls, minimalist furniture, a bowl of expensive mints on the table like that somehow softened the tension in the room. I arrived 15 minutes early. Sierra was already there, reviewing the agreement draft we'd prepared. She wore a charcoal suit and a face that didn't blink. When I asked if she was ready, she said, "You have the truth. That's all we need." Annabelle arrived right on time. She walked in like it was another industry gala. Elegant blouse, controlled smile, not a strand of hair out of place. Royce followed behind, looking more like an overpaid accountant than the smooth-talking producer I once trusted. He gave me a nod. I didn't return it. They sat across from us, and for a moment, no one spoke. The silence hummed like feedback from an untuned mic. Finally, their lawyer, some big-name guy with a reputation for bulldozing contracts, broke the ice. "We believe this matter can be resolved in good faith, provided everyone remains reasonable," Sierra slid a folder across the table. "Our terms are outlined here. They are non-negotiable." The lawyer opened it, eyes scanning quickly before his lips curled. "This is absurd," he muttered. $50,000 settlement? No ongoing royalties? No ownership stake in future licensing? Sierra didn't flinch. "In exchange, Mr. Westfield agrees not to pursue criminal charges for fraud, identity misrepresentation, or intellectual property theft." Royce laughed, a dry, nervous chuckle. "Let's not get dramatic." That's when Sierra pressed play. She'd brought a speaker, small and discreet, tucked beside her legal pad. The audio crackled to life, the unmistakable voice of Royce saying, "Johnny's too sentimental, he'll never see it coming." Followed by Annabelle mocking my memoir, calling me pathetic. Annabelle's head whipped toward me. "You recorded us?" "No," I said calmly. "Your own tour staff did. Guess they remembered loyalty better than you did." Her lawyer stiffened. Royce turned pale. The power shifted in that instant, like a stage light moving off them and back onto me. "Sierra," continued, her voice surgical, "this is just a preview. The full recording includes discussions of rebranding Johnny's catalog, falsifying credits, and transferring ownership through shell companies, all of which are prosecutable offenses." Annabelle finally spoke, her voice stripped of performance. "You can't prove I knew what Royce was doing." I looked her dead in the eye. "You didn't just know, you signed off, you stood by, you benefited, but don't worry, I'm not here to ruin you, just to end this." She looked away. Her lawyer asked for a break. They left the room. Sierra leaned toward me. "They're going to fold." I nodded but didn't smile. My hands were steady. My heart didn't race. Because this wasn't triumph, it was closure. 20 minutes later, they returned. Their attorney looked defeated. "My clients are prepared to accept your terms with one amendment, a confidentiality clause. No public discussion of this settlement or the contents of the recordings." Sierra didn't even glance at me. "That was already included." Signed the paperwork that afternoon. Annabelle's hand trembled as she penned her name on the final page. Royce didn't look up once. When it was done, Annabelle turned to me. "Was any of it ever real for you?" I studied her face, one I'd loved for almost 2 decades, and said, "Every moment. That's why it hurts more than you'll ever know." She nodded, eyes wet, but no tears fell. Then she walked out, heels clicking like an echo of our old life, each step fading. I remained in the conference room for a while, letting the silence settle. Sierra packed up the papers and said quietly, "They underestimated you." "They always do," I replied. "But that's how the best songs start. Quietly." Outside, the sky had turned that same shade of gold I remembered from the porch the day she called me. Except now, the silence wasn't haunting. It was earned. It was mine. 3 weeks after the mediation, the music world shifted, quietly, and exactly how I planned. Word leaked, as it always does, but not from me. I hadn't said a thing, and legally I couldn't. But in Nashville and Los Angeles, in the dark corners of session bars and industry lounges, people talked. They whispered about a settlement, about Royce pulling out of 2 major licensing deals, about Annabelle canceling her memoir indefinitely. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I just went about my days with a new kind of peace humming underneath the silence. One morning I walked into Mitch's office and found an envelope on his desk, a handwritten note from a music foundation in Austin. They'd heard about the trust I'd created to protect my catalog. They wanted to partner on a scholarship for young musicians focused on ethics in songwriting and publishing law. "Use your story," the letter said. "Not for drama, but for direction." I read that line twice. 2 weeks later, we launched the Westfield Grant for Ethical Arts, funded directly by the royalties Annabelle never got her hands on. The money that was meant to pad her exit became seed for someone else's beginning. The call started after that. A film director who wanted to license Dust Roads and Bloodlines for a Vietnam-era drama. A record label that wanted to release a retrospective of my unreleased demos. Even a museum in Tennessee wanted to feature my old notebook pages, the ones Annabelle used to call your scribbles, in an exhibit about American songwriting. But I didn't say yes to all of them. That's the thing about power once you've earned it back. You don't need to prove anything, you get to choose. What I did say yes to was a re-recording project, not for money, for legacy. I brought together a group of young session players, all under 30, most of them unknown. We went into a simple analog studio in Laurel Canyon. No auto-tune, no polished production. Just wood, wire, and raw harmony. We recorded stripped-down versions of my most meaningful songs, exactly how they were first written. During one take, a guitarist asked me why I was doing this now. I said, because the story got interrupted, and I want to finish it in my own voice. The album was released quietly. No press campaign, no awards bait, just a Bandcamp link and a handwritten note posted to my old fan club website. Still, it found ears. A few radio stations started spinning. The new version of Familiar Ghosts. College DJs emailed me for interviews. One blog called it an act of quiet reclamation. I like that. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation, and that hit deeper than any chart. One morning, I received a certified letter from Royce's former label. He'd been dropped. Officially. The memo cited contractual misconduct and reputational damage. Unofficially, I knew it was because the industry doesn't like messes they can't control. He'd made too much noise and now they were wiping their hands of him. As for Annabelle, she resurfaced in a magazine profile 6 months later. The article called her a misunderstood muse who stepped away from the spotlight to teach songwriting workshops in Sedona. No mention of me. No mention of Royce. Just a grainy photo of her on a wooden stage playing a borrowed guitar. She looked tired, and if I'm honest, I didn't feel satisfaction reading that. I felt something closer to mercy, because I understood now what we'd built had been real once. But somewhere along the way she stopped believing in it. And when belief dies, people scramble for survival. Some lie, some steal, some run. I chose to rebuild, and rebuilding gave me something she could never steal. Clarity. I sat on my back porch one evening, the same spot where it had all started unraveling. A copy of the new record sat beside me, still warm from the sun. The credits read, produced by Johnny Westfield. All songs owned, written, and arranged by Johnny Westfield. That was justice, not in courtrooms, not in headlines, but in the quiet ownership of what was mine all along. That night, a young fan messaged me, said he heard one of my new tracks and wanted to write songs just like that. Honest, raw, fearless. I replied with just one line. Write what they tried to take from you. That's where the gold is. Justice doesn't always come in a courtroom. Sometimes it walks in quietly, wearing a guitar strap, not a badge. It doesn't roar, it resonates. And in my case, it came not from revenge, but from reclaiming what they thought I'd given up, my voice, my legacy, and my name. I didn't burn bridges, I didn't throw punches, I just waited, planned, and spoke when the silence was finally mine to fill. What they tried to take wasn't just money, it was the meaning behind everything I'd lived for. But in the end, the truth had better chords, and I played them in tune. If you've ever felt erased by someone you trusted, by a system that underestimated you, or by a love that chose ambition over loyalty, remember this. You don't need to fight loud to win, you just need to stay standing, long enough to be heard when it matters most. Let me ask you this. Have you ever stayed silent not because you were weak, but because you were waiting for the perfect moment to speak? Share your thoughts below. I read every word. And if this story struck a chord with you, go ahead. Like, subscribe, or pass it on to someone who's still writing their own comeback.